In 1998, the Holloway family walked into this mall for an ordinary Saturday of shopping. They were never seen again. The minivan they drove was found 3 days later, abandoned at the edge of a construction site. Doors locked, keys missing. Inside, nothing, no fingerprints, no struggle. Just absence. 26 years later, the case remains unsolved. But a recent discovery during renovations inside the same mall threatens to open old wounds, and what was uncovered could finally explain what happened to the Holloways that day. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe. It helps us keep uncovering the cases others have left behind. November 14th, 1998. Riverway Mall, Austin, Texas. The parking lot shimmered under a pale Texas sun, rows of vehicles glinting in late morning light. The Holloways arrived just after 10:15 a.m. Their maroon Dodge Caravan eased into a space near the north entrance, not far from the carousel that spun endlessly in the atrium beyond the glass doors. Inside the van, the children pressed against the windows. 13-year-old Sarah begged to be dropped at the music store first. 7-year-old Daniel wanted to ride the carousel. Their mother, Elaine, smoothed her skirt and reminded them that they were there for Christmas shopping, not just fun. Their father, Tom, a dentist with an easy laugh and quiet habits, checked his watch. "We've got 3 hours before the game comes on," he said. "Plenty of time." The family crossed the lot together. A passing security guard later recalled Tom holding his son's hand. Elaine carried a small purse. Sarah trailed slightly, fiddling with her Discman headphones. They disappeared inside with dozens of other families, vanishing into the fluorescent-lit air of Saturday commerce. And then, nothing. By mid-afternoon, Elaine's sister called their home. The Holloways weren't back. Calls to Tom's office went unanswered. By evening, their neighbor drove past the house. Curtains drawn, driveway empty. On Sunday, police were alerted. By Monday, search dogs had combed the parking lot. The van was missing. The family was gone. 3 days later, the van turned up at a construction site 10 miles away. Empty. No sign of a struggle. No Holloways. The Riverway Mall carried on. Footsteps echoed. Children lined up for Santa in December. Shoppers passed the spot where the Holloways had last been seen. A mall is a place where families gather, but it also swallows them into its endless corridors. The Holloways were one more family among thousands that day, and then they weren't. What happened inside those walls would remain buried for decades. The audio recorder clicked on. This is Cold Echoes, Episode 41, The Mall Disappearance. I'm your host, Ryan Calder. Today, we revisit the 1998 case of the Holloway family, Tom, Elaine, 13-year-old Sarah, and 7-year-old Daniel, who vanished inside Riverway Mall in Austin, Texas. Their disappearance remains one of the most confounding unsolved cases in Texas history. Ryan's voice was calm, deliberate. He sat in the spare bedroom of his small Dallas apartment, foam padding taped to the walls. On the desk, microphone, laptop, a scattering of case files borrowed from online archives. The Holloways had haunted him since his college days, when he'd stumbled across a forum thread titled "Families That Vanished Without a Trace." Now, he leaned closer to the mic. In the last 6 months, Riverway Mall has been undergoing major renovations. A demolition crew recently made a discovery that could finally break this case open. What they found was so disturbing that the Austin Police Department has reclassified the Holloways case as an active homicide investigation. He paused, letting silence settle. He knew how to hold his listeners. But before we get there, we need to go back to the Saturday morning when a family walked into a mall and never came out. Ryan pressed stop. He'd splice in archival news clips later. For now, he rubbed his temples, staring at the photo pinned above his desk. The Holloways smiled stiffly in a church directory snapshot. Tom in his pressed shirt, Elaine in a floral blouse, Sarah with braces, Daniel with missing baby teeth. Ordinary, almost painfully ordinary. Behind them, his computer pinged with a new email. He opened it. The subject line read, "I know what happened." Ryan frowned. Messages like this weren't uncommon. Armchair detectives, hoaxers, the lonely and the delusional. But something about the sender's address, a string of numbers, nothing identifiable, made his stomach tighten. The body of the email was short. "Check storage unit 112C, Burnett Road. You'll find what the police ignored." He sat back. Burnett Road ran less than 20 minutes from the mall. Was it bait? A prank? Or something else? Ryan didn't reply. Instead, he reached for his phone. That night, rain streaked Austin's streets as he pulled into the dimly lit storage facility. Row after row of metal doors stretched into darkness. His breath misted as he located 112C. The padlock was new. Too new. For a long moment he simply stood there, the hiss of rain filling his ears. Then he crouched, running his fingers along the edges. He wasn't about to break in, not without police. But the weight of possibility pressed down on him. Something was shifting. The Holloways weren't just a cold case anymore. He left the facility, but he carried the image of that new padlock with him into the night. By the following morning, he'd already called Detective Laura Vega, recently assigned to the reopened Holloway file. Vega was skeptical of podcasters, but Ryan's persistence and the fact that he'd once interned with APD's records division earned him a cautious meeting. When he mentioned the email, Vega's expression hardened. "We've had tips before," she said. "Most go nowhere." "Then why does it feel different this time?" Ryan pressed. Vega didn't answer. She simply gathered her coat. "Let's go see." The storage unit door clanged open under official hands. Vega's flashlight beam cut across stacks of boxes. Dust motes swirled in the stale air. At first glance it was junk. Broken chairs, old VHS tapes, a dismantled crib. Then, in the far corner, Vega froze. A child's backpack. Blue, faded, with a name stitched on the tag in bright thread. Sarah. Ryan's chest tightened. For 16 years, the Holloways had been nothing but a grainy photo and a memory. Now, tangible evidence. The case had shifted from memory to presence, and the darkness of Riverway Mall, buried for nearly 2 decades, was about to be forced into the light. The first step in reopening a long cold case is to reconstruct time. Not the years lost, but the hours. The final hours before everything changed. Detective Vega spread photographs across the conference table. They were glossy, worn from being handled. A receipt from the food court Chick-fil-A, time-stamped 11:47 a.m. A carousel token found in the Holloway's van. A fragment of surveillance footage where Sarah's ponytail swayed as she laughed at her brother. "These are the pieces," Vega said, her tone precise, almost surgical. "Now we find the seams." Ryan sat across from her, notebook open. He wasn't a cop, but his podcast had taught him that families don't vanish in bulk. Something always happens in the seams. That Saturday morning had been ordinary in every sense. Weather records described clear skies, 68 degrees at noon. Traffic around Riverway Mall was light, as the University of Texas game wouldn't start until later in the afternoon. Witnesses recalled Tom Holloway parking on the north side, near the J.C. Penney entrance. From there, they entered the mall's atrium, a cathedral of glass and white tile. Security tapes showed them at 10:22 a.m. The footage wasn't clear. Cameras in the late 90s were analog, their images grainy, distorted at the edges. But it was enough. Tom with his hand on Daniel's shoulder, Elaine adjusting her purse strap, Sarah tugging at her headphones. A family in motion, indistinguishable from the dozens of others passing through the sliding doors. The first solid timestamp was 10:41. They purchased carousel tokens at a small kiosk run by an elderly woman named Nancy Turner. She remembered them because Daniel had been shy. refusing to hand her the dollar bill himself. Elaine had coaxed him, smiling apologetically. "Sweet little boy," Turner said in her 1998 statement. "Didn't want to ride alone." Minutes later, another tape captured the carousel itself. Bright horses spun to tinny organ music, children clinging to painted poles. Sarah stood by the rail, arms crossed, watching her brother laugh. Tom leaned against a pillar, hands in his pockets. Elaine adjusted her purse again, and then they moved on. At 11:05, they appeared briefly outside Sam Goody, where Sarah pressed her face to the glass, pointing at a display of CDs. Security footage caught Tom shaking his head, laughing as Sarah dramatically pouted. Elaine put a hand on her daughter's back, guiding her toward the food court. Receipts showed a Chick-fil-A transaction at 11:47, 2 combo meals, 1 kids' meal, and a lemonade. The cashier, interviewed years later, barely remembered them. "The boy wanted extra sauce, I think." That's all. From there, the trail blurred. The next footage was 12:22, a wide shot of the East Concourse near Dillard's. The Holloways walked together, but something about their formation had changed. Tom trailed slightly behind, head turned as if listening. Elaine was speaking to him, hand half raised. Sarah walked several paces ahead, earphones back in place, Daniel skipping beside her. And then, nothing. No camera caught them leaving. No footage showed them walking back through the atrium, or into the parking lot, or toward the exits. It was as though the tiled floor had opened and swallowed them whole. Ryan studied the sequence over and over, his pen scratching notes. 10:22, entry, 10:41, carousel, 11:05, Sam Goody, 11:47, food court receipt, 12:22, East Concourse. And then, silence. He looked up at Vega. It's like a narrative with no ending. Her eyes were sharp, or an ending that someone cut out of the tape. Old case files were littered with leads that had dried up. A janitor swore he saw the family near the bathrooms after noon. A mall employee claimed Sarah was arguing with her parents in the parking lot. Dozens of tips, each one vague, contradictory, or unverifiable. But buried in the 1998 log was something that caught Ryan's eye. A woman named Paula Hensley, then 17, had been interviewed 3 days after the disappearance. She'd been working at Claire's boutique. She told detectives she'd seen a man in a gray windbreaker following the Holloways down the East Concourse. She described him as thin, with wire-rimmed glasses, maybe in his 50s. Police had brushed it aside. One more fuzzy sighting in a sea of bad leads. Ryan circled the name in his notes. Where's she now? Vega flipped through her tablet. Hensley? Married, 2 kids, lives in Round Rock. Ryan's pulse quickened. 16 years later, memories fade, but sometimes guilt doesn't. They found Paula in a quiet cul-de-sac, her house lined with children's bikes and chalk drawings on the driveway. She looked older than her years, lines etched deep into her face. When she saw the badge on Vega's belt, she tensed. I already told police what I saw, she said, crossing her arms. Vega's voice was steady. We're revisiting everything. Just tell us again. In your own words, Paula hesitated, then gestured toward the porch. Fine, but it's not going to help. They sat in folding chairs while neighborhood sprinklers hissed in the distance. Paula stared at her hands. I was working the morning shift. Around lunchtime, I went to grab food. On my way back, I saw them, the Holloways. Everyone was talking about them after, so I know it was them. They were walking down the east side, and behind them, there was this man. He wasn't with them. Not close. Just watching. Like he was waiting. Her voice dropped. He looked at me, just for a second. And I swear, he smiled. But it wasn't right. Ryan leaned forward. You said gray windbreaker, glasses. Yes, thin, white, I don't know, maybe 50. But I'll never forget that smile. Like he knew something I didn't. Vega scribbled in her notebook. Why didn't the police follow up? They said too many people matched that description. That I probably just noticed some random guy. Paula's mouth tightened. But I know what I saw. Driving back, Vega was quiet. Rain streaked across the windshield, the wipers rhythmic. Ryan finally spoke. A man following them. Smiling. That can't be nothing, unless it's everything, Vega murmured. For 16 years, the Holloways had been a puzzle with missing pieces. Now, at least one piece, a face, a figure, was beginning to emerge from the static. And somewhere in the seams of that Saturday, between the carousel and the concourse, the truth waited. The Dodge Caravan was found on a Tuesday morning, November 17th, 1998, 3 days after the Holloways vanished. It sat at the edge of a half-built office park off Highway 71, its maroon paint dulled by dust and drizzle. The construction site was mostly abandoned, skeletons of steel beams rising out of red clay. A survey crew spotted the vehicle first, parked neatly on gravel as though someone had left it there after work. But there were no work crews that weekend. When police arrived, the van's doors were locked, windows intact. No signs of forced entry. The keys were missing. Detectives peered through the glass. Inside, fast food wrappers, scattered toys, a single carousel token on the floor mat. No blood, no fingerprints, no Holloways. The van was clean. Too clean. 16 years later, Detective Vega and Ryan stood in the Austin Police Evidence Bay. The caravan had long since been dismantled, its shells scrapped, but its contents remained in cardboard boxes stacked neatly on steel shelves. Vega lifted the lid off the first box. Here it is. The Holloway van. Ryan leaned over. Inside lay artifacts of a vanished family. A juice box flattened against plastic wrap, a torn Chick-fil-A receipt, a cassette tape labeled mixed. Summer 1997 in looping handwriting. He picked up the cassette, turning it over in his hands. It feels personal. Like touching their breath, Vega nodded. Objects outlive people, but they don't explain them. She pulled a plastic evidence bag from the second box. Inside was a small pink hairbrush, its bristles bent and clogged with strands of brown hair. A label identified it as belonging to Sarah. Found wedged between the seat and the floorboard, Vega said. No fingerprints other than hers. Ryan swallowed. 16 years collapsed into that tiny object. A teenager brushing her hair in the passenger seat, never imagining it would be the last thing she left behind. The van had been studied obsessively in the early investigation. Detectives mapped every inch. No forced locks, no broken ignition. Whoever parked it had the keys. Tire tracks suggested the vehicle had turned smoothly off the road, not swerved. The driver had chosen the spot deliberately, between a mound of gravel and an unfinished loading dock. Inside, the seats were arranged as if the family had simply stepped out. Front mats clean, back seats free of clutter. The only disturbance was in the rear cargo area, where the carpet showed faint indentations, as if something heavy had rested there for several hours. Dogs had been brought in. They circled, sniffed, whined, then lost the trail 50 yards from the vehicle. Theories sprouted. The family had staged their disappearance. They'd been abducted after leaving the mall. Someone else had driven the van. But no one could explain how a family of 4 simply vanished without a trace of struggle inside or outside the vehicle. Ryan flipped through the old photographs. One image showed the van under gray skies, yellow tape fluttering in the wind. Another showed the carousel token on the floor mat, gleaming under flash. He tapped the photo. Why just one token? Vega arched a brow. You think it means something? It's a breadcrumb, Ryan said. Kids hoard things. A token in the van means Daniel didn't use it. He carried it with him, which means whatever happened, it was after the carousel, after lunch. He still had it when they left. Vega considered this. So they made it back to the car. Or someone made sure their things did. They decided to revisit the site. The office park was complete now. Glass towers rising where red clay once stretched. But the corner where the van had been discovered was still there. A shadowed cul-de-sac behind Building 2, used for delivery trucks and dumpsters. Ryan stood in the space, trying to imagine it in 1998. Empty beams, gravel, silence. The van sitting alone like an abandoned thought. "Why here?" he murmured. Vega folded her arms. Close enough to the highway to dump fast. Isolated enough that no one notices for a while. "But 3 days," Ryan said. 3 whole days before someone saw it. That's not luck, that's planning. They both fell silent, the hum of HVAC units filling the air. Back in the archives, Vega dug up the original canvassing reports. Few workers had been on site that weekend. Most of the construction had paused. But one name surfaced repeatedly. A night security guard, employed by a subcontractor who patrolled the grounds. His name was Robert Keeley. Keeley had been interviewed once in 1998. He claimed he saw nothing unusual, just checked the gates, and left. His statement had been brief, almost perfunctory. "Why didn't they press him harder?" Ryan asked. Vega shrugged. No record of why. Maybe they believed him. Maybe they were stretched too thin. Ryan's pen scratched across his notebook. "Where is he now?" Vega tapped her keyboard. Her expression tightened. "Keeley's still in Austin. Lives off South Lamar." Retired Ryan's pulse quickened. The van hadn't just been a ghost. It had been left in someone's sight line, and the man who'd guarded that empty office park might have been the last person to see it. They drove to Keeley's address the next afternoon. His house was a squat, single-story ranch, its yard cluttered with wind chimes and faded lawn ornaments. Keeley himself answered the door. Late 70s now, hair thinned, eyes wary behind thick glasses. Detective Vega introduced herself, flashing her badge. Keeley stiffened. "I told you people everything back then," he said. "There's nothing else to say." "We'd like to ask a few follow-ups," Vega replied evenly. "It won't take long." Keeley hesitated, then stepped aside. The living room smelled of stale tobacco and liniment. They sat on a couch while Keeley lowered himself into a recliner. His hands trembled slightly. "You were working security at the site in '98, Vega began. "Do you remember the van?" Keeley's jaw worked. "Of course I remember. Hard to forget. Family disappeared, then that thing shows up on my watch. People whispered about me for years. Thought I had something to do with it. Did you?" Ryan asked softly. Keeley's gaze snapped to him. "No, but I saw something." The room stilled. Keeley rubbed his palms on his jeans. "It was late. Sunday night, I think. I was making rounds, saw headlights in the distance, figured it was one of the contractors checking in. But when I got closer, the car was just sitting there, parked neat, like it belonged. I thought maybe one of the foremen left it. Didn't think twice. Did you see who was driving?" Vega pressed. Keeley's lips tightened. "A man. Tall, maybe. He walked off toward the tree line before I could get close." Didn't look back. Ryan leaned forward. "Could you describe him?" Keeley shook his head. "Too dark. Just a shape. But..." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I heard something. From the van. A thud, like something heavy dropped inside. And then silence." The words hung in the stale air. Vega's pen moved across her notebook. "Why didn't you report that?" Keeley's eyes dropped to the floor. "Because I was scared. I didn't want to be the guy who heard ghosts in the night. I thought maybe it was just tools left behind. I didn't want trouble." Ryan's chest tightened. 16 years of silence. A sound inside the van that night. A man walking away into the dark. The van wasn't just abandoned. It had been used. When they left Keely's house, the air outside felt sharper, heavier. Ryan turned to Vega. He sat on that for 16 years. He's an old man now, Vega said. People bury things they don't want to face. But if someone was still in that van Sunday night, Ryan trailed off, his mind racing. Then the Holloways might not have been killed at the mall. They could have been alive for days. Vega said nothing. Her silence was answer enough. That night, Ryan recorded a draft for his next episode. His voice shook as he spoke into the microphone. The van was more than a clue. It was a container of silence. For 16 years, the official story was that the Holloways vanished instantly. But what if they didn't? What if they lived, unseen, in those missing days? The Dodge Caravan was parked like a tomb. But maybe it was a prison first. He pressed stop, staring at the cassette tape still on his desk. Sarah's handwriting stared back at him. Mixed, summer 1997. Music she'd chosen, songs she'd loved. A voice frozen on magnetic tape. Ryan shivered. The van hadn't just been empty. It had been speaking all along. The Holloway case had collected witnesses the way a coastline gathers driftwood, scattered, weathered, and often contradictory. In 1998, Riverway Mall employed over 200 staff, not counting contractors, vendors, or seasonal workers. Nearly all had been interviewed at least once, some twice, a few, multiple times. But memory is not a file cabinet. It bends, it smudges, and sometimes it lies. Detective Vega stacked transcripts on the table of the small APD conference room. "This is where the case drowned," she said. "Too many stories. Too many shadows." Ryan flipped through the pages. Each was a sliver of someone else's Saturday. A janitor swore he saw Elaine and Tom near the restrooms at 12:45. A teenage clerk claimed Sarah had been in Hot Topic alone, around 1. A mother said she'd heard a boy crying in the parking lot that afternoon. None of it fit. Or maybe all of it did. "We need to re-listen," Ryan said. Vega nodded. But in person. The first stop was a retirement home on the south side of the city. Nancy Turner, the carousel attendant. Her memory had been the cornerstone of the case in 1998. She was the one who sold the tokens, the one who remembered Daniel hiding behind his mother's skirt. Now she was 81, her hair thin and white, her hands trembling in her lap as she welcomed them into the common room. "I told them all I knew," she said softly, her voice frail but steady. "But no one ever listened past the first time." Vega leaned forward. "Tell us again, Nancy." As if it happened yesterday, Nancy's gaze went distant, eyes focusing on something invisible in the air. "He was shy. The boy wouldn't give me the $1. His mama nudged him, gentle, like mothers do. The father laughed, said he'd ride too, but he didn't. He just leaned against the pillar. I remember thinking he looked tired, worn down, like he carried more than shopping bags. And the girl?" Ryan asked. Nancy's lips tightened. Teenagers are always in their own world. She had those headphones, rolling her eyes. But she smiled when her brother waved from the horse. That smile stuck with me. It looked like she was caught between being a child and being something else. Nancy's eyes watered. And then, nothing. They walked away. I thought they'd be back. They never were. Silence lingered. The carousel, dismantled years ago, lived only in her memory now, and in the shadows of surveillance footage. Later that day, Vega and Ryan tracked down a man named Charles Ruiz. In 1998, he'd been a security guard at Riverway. He was 40 then, ex-military, stiff-backed. Now he lived in a modest duplex, oxygen tubes looped around his ears, his once broad shoulders slumped. "I worked that shift," he rasped when Vega explained why they were there. "Did the rounds. I saw them. You know, the Holloways?" Ryan asked. "Yes, twice. First near the food court, then later by the east exit." Ryan's pulse quickened. What time? Had to be after 1, Ruiz said, squinting as though peering back through fog. I was near the loading docks. Saw them from a distance. They weren't hurrying, just walking. Together, Vega pressed. You're certain it was them? Ruiz nodded. The little boy was holding a balloon. Red. I remember because it burst, a sharp pop. He cried, and the mother bent down to comfort him. Ryan scribbled in his notebook. No balloon appears in the footage. Ruiz wheezed a dry laugh. Those cameras? Half of them didn't even work. Weren't pointed where they should be. I told management a dozen times. So you believe they left through the east exit? Vega asked. Ruiz's gaze grew cloudy. That's what I saw. But when I told the detectives, they said maybe I was mixing families up. Said too many people fit that description. His jaw tightened. I know what I saw. A red balloon. A crying boy. Conflicting memories piled up like a bad hand of cards. If Ruiz was right, the Holloways were alive past 1 p.m., almost an hour after their last verified sighting. That meant either the timeline was wrong, or the cameras missed something. Ryan's podcasting instinct buzzed. Listeners would devour this contradiction. But to him, it was more than content. It was oxygen. Evidence that the story wasn't sealed. Still, Vega remained measured. Memories fracture, she reminded him, especially under pressure. Ryan didn't disagree, but 2 witnesses, 16 years apart, had painted similar pictures. The family moving calmly, not panicked, not abducted in chaos. Which begged the question, if something happened to them, did it happen willingly? The 3rd interview was the most unsettling. Her name was Jennifer Lee. In 1998, she'd been 19, working part-time at Claire's. The same Claire's where Paula Hensley had once spotted the man in the gray windbreaker. Jennifer hadn't spoken publicly since. She agreed to meet only in the back booth of a dim diner off the interstate. Her hands shook as she stirred her coffee. I always told myself I didn't see anything, she said, her voice barely audible over the jukebox hum. But I did. I didn't want to be dragged into it. What did you see? Vega asked gently. Jennifer's eyes flicked to Ryan, then back down. I was on break. Around noon. I cut through the service hallway near J.C. Penney. I saw them, the Holloways. They weren't alone. There was a man with them. He had his hand on the boy's shoulder. Ryan's breath caught. Do you remember what he looked like? Older. Glasses. Thin face. He wore a gray jacket. Same one Paula described, I guess. But it wasn't just that. It was the way the father looked at him. Not scared. Almost resigned. Like he knew him. Silence pressed in. You're sure it was Tom Holloway? Vega asked. Jennifer nodded. Yes, he had that dentist look, you know? Clean cut, nice hair. But he wasn't leading. The man in gray was. They followed him down the hall, out of sight. Ryan's hand shook as he wrote. A family following another man. Not dragged, not running, following. Jennifer's lips trembled. I thought maybe it was a relative. An uncle or something. But then the news broke, and I realized. I should have said something. I should have. Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth with both hands. Vega spoke softly. You're saying Tom Holloway appeared to know the man? Yes, Jennifer whispered. That's what I can't shake. He knew him back in the car. Vega gripped the steering wheel in silence. Rain tapped against the windshield, slow and steady. Ryan stared at his notebook. 3 witnesses. 3 fragments. Nancy, the carousel, the shy boy, the smile. Ruiz, a red balloon bursting by the east exit. Jennifer, a man in gray, leading them down a service hall. Together, they formed something chilling. The Holloways didn't vanish in chaos. They were ushered. Ryan whispered, what if they weren't abducted, but escorted? Vega's jaw tightened. Then the question is, by who? And why would Tom follow? Ryan glanced at her, because maybe it wasn't a stranger. That night, Ryan lay awake in his apartment, the rain echoing outside. He replayed Jennifer's words in his mind. He knew him. If true, the Holloway's disappearance wasn't random. It wasn't the work of a faceless predator trolling the mall. It was personal. And buried inside those 16 years of silence was a relationship, a connection no one had ever uncovered. The Holloways hadn't just vanished. They had been taken by someone they trusted. Riverway Mall was no longer the polished beacon it had been in 1998. Once, it had glittered with skylights and polished tile, a fortress of consumer confidence. Now, it was a relic. Still open, but worn down, its escalators groaning, its storefronts half empty. In 2013, a new developer bought the property and began renovations. Old wings were closed, ceilings gutted, service corridors pried open. Walls that had stood undisturbed for decades were suddenly stripped back to bone. That was when workers found it. A forgotten room. The call came through Vega's desk at 9 in the morning. A construction supervisor, rattled but measured, reported that his crew had uncovered a sealed maintenance closet behind a false wall in the East Concourse. No record of the space appeared on the mall's blueprints. Ryan was already waiting at headquarters when Vega hung up. Her tone was flat. They found something. Within an hour, they were standing in the concourse, the smell of drywall dust thick in the air. The mall echoed strangely, a ghost of what it once was. Yellow tape fluttered near an opening where part of the wall had been knocked away. A foreman guided them inside. We were tearing down paneling, and the sledge went right through. Behind it, the room was hardly bigger than a walk-in closet. Its walls were concrete, its floor bare. The only feature was a single, rusted folding chair in the corner and a pile of decayed fabric on the floor. The air was stale, suffocating, like something long sealed away. Ryan's throat tightened. "What the hell is this place?" Vega scanned with a flashlight. "Not on any map." Which means someone built it themselves. Forensics moved in swiftly. Photographs were taken, swabs lifted. The decayed fabric revealed itself as clothing, denim, cotton, faded colors. A child's t-shirt with a cartoon rocket. A woman's blouse, shoes with the laces missing. Ryan crouched, staring at the rocket t-shirt through the plastic gloves of a tech. His mind spun. Daniel Holloway had been obsessed with space, according to the case file. Teachers said he carried drawings of rockets in his backpack. Ryan's voice cracked. "It's theirs, isn't it?" Vega's expression was unreadable. "We'll test. But yeah, it looks like it." The forensics techs also bagged 3 other items. A cassette tape, unspooled, tangled in dust. A disposable camera, corroded but intact. And a spiral notebook, water-damaged, its pages warped and faintly stained. The notebook's cover was pink with stickers peeling from its surface. In the corner, in juvenile handwriting, was a single name, Sarah. That night, Vega and Ryan sat in the evidence room, the items laid out before them under sterile light. The cassette tape would require restoration. The camera's film might be salvageable, but the notebook, that was immediate. Gloved, Vega carefully opened the warped cover. The first pages were ruined by water stains, the ink blurred into black clouds. But deeper in, faint writing emerged. Ryan leaned in, pulse hammering. It wasn't a diary. Not exactly. It was fragments, lists, doodles, song lyrics, but also words that carried a desperate tone. "I don't like it here." He said not to tell Dad. "Daniel cried last night. We have to stay quiet." Ryan's stomach flipped. "She wrote this here." In that room, Vega's lips pressed thin. "We can't assume. But it reads like captivity." Ryan's voice was hoarse. "This isn't just a disappearance. This is imprisonment." The disposable camera was sent to a lab. Weeks later, the photos came back. Out of 27 exposures, only 7 developed clearly. The first 3 were ordinary. A blurry shot of the mall carousel, Daniel's small hand holding the pole of a painted horse. Elaine smiling faintly beside him. The fourth showed a tiled hallway, fluorescent lights glaring. The frame was tilted, as if snapped in haste. The fifth was darker. A man's silhouette, tall, thin, standing in front of a doorway. His face blurred, but his outline sharp enough to stir dread. The sixth was stranger still. The inside of the hidden room. A chair, a shoe on the floor. A child's hand in the corner of the frame, caught mid-motion. And the seventh. Ryan stared at it for long minutes. It was a close-up of Sarah's face. Eyes wide, not smiling. A teenager trying to look strong while her world collapsed. Ryan whispered, "It's like she left us messages." Vega said nothing, but her jaw clenched. News of the discovery leaked within days. Local stations ran with it. Forgotten room in Riverway Mall may hold clues to Holloway case. Crowds gathered outside the mall. Families with strollers slowed to stare at the taped-off concourse. True crime enthusiasts snapped photos for forums. But for Elaine's sister, Margaret, the discovery ripped open old wounds. She called Ryan late one night, her voice breaking. I told them something terrible happened in that place. Now they've found proof. And all I can think about is my little nephew crying in the dark." Ryan tried to answer, but his throat closed. Margaret whispered, "Find out what happened. Please, don't let them fade into rumors." Weeks later, DNA tests confirmed it. The blouse belonged to Elaine. The rocket t-shirt belonged to Daniel. Hair samples from the brush matched the strands found in the hidden room. And Sarah's notebook. Authentic. Her handwriting, verified by school papers. It was official. The Holloways hadn't just disappeared from the mall. They had been held inside it. Ryan recorded his next podcast in near darkness. The discovery of the forgotten room changes everything. For 16 years, we thought the Holloways vanished between security cameras. Now we know they were taken into the belly of the mall itself. Hidden behind drywall, sealed in a tomb of concrete. The mall was their prison. The question is, who built the cell, and how could a family of 4 be hidden in the busiest place in Austin, without anyone noticing? He let silence hang before hitting stop. But inside, his heart pounded with a single thought. If the Holloways were locked in that room, someone had come and gone to keep them there. Someone who worked the mall. Someone still alive. And someone who might have watched from the shadows as a family suffered in silence, for hours, or days, or longer. The man in the gray windbreaker had haunted the Holloway case since its beginning. Witnesses disagreed on nearly everything else. What time the family was last seen, which exit they used, whether Sarah had been alone or with her parents. But 2 separate people, Paula Hensley, the mother shopping at Claire's, and Jennifer Lee, the young clerk, had described him. Thin, glasses, gray jacket, always close by. In the first weeks of the investigation, police combed through mall employee rosters, vendors, contractors. No one matched cleanly. Leads fizzled. He became a ghost story. The man in the parking lot, a figure some swore was there, others dismissed as misremembered. Now, with the forgotten room uncovered, Vega and Ryan knew better. The Holloways had not walked willingly into a void. Someone had guided them, and the man in gray was no longer a ghost. He was flesh. The original case files listed dozens of mall employees who worked that November weekend. Vega laid them out across a long table in the APD conference room. Names, photos, HR files, janitors, security guards, carousel attendants, maintenance workers. 16 years, Vega said. Some of these people are gone, moved, died. But we start here. Ryan picked up one personnel file. The ID badge photo showed a man with wire-rimmed glasses, gaunt cheeks, unsmiling. His name, Reed Barrow. Maintenance crew. Look at this, Ryan murmured. Glasses, thin face. Hired in '96, left the following spring. No forwarding address. Vega leaned over his shoulder. Maintenance would have access to the service corridors. Even to that hidden room, Ryan tapped the photo, and he disappears right after the Holloways do. They traced Barrow's employment history. Sparse. Before the mall, he'd worked short stints, a warehouse job in Dallas, janitorial work in Waco. Each lasted barely a year. No stable ties, no family listed, no social footprint. Drifters like this are hard to track, Vega said. They fall through cracks on purpose. Ryan stared at the file photo. The man's eyes looked oddly hollow, even captured in a quick badge shot. What if he's still here? Ryan asked. Vega shook her head. Or what if he's buried under another name? 2 nights later, Ryan combed through the old police interviews again. One statement, long ignored, caught his attention. A teenage skater named Kyle Ramirez had told officers he saw a man in a gray jacket lingering near the east parking lot around 2 p.m. Just watching, not smoking, not on the phone. Just watching, Kyle said the man leaned against a light pole, eyes fixed on the family section where parents parked with strollers. He didn't approach anyone, but he didn't move either. The report had been dismissed at the time, too vague. But to Ryan, the description snapped into focus now. He was waiting. Not randomly. Purposefully. They found Kyle Ramirez 16 years older, now a mechanic running his father's shop. He remembered more than Ryan expected. Yeah, I saw him, Kyle said, wiping grease from his hands. Kinda weird guy. Just standing there in the lot. I was skating circles near the curb. He didn't even look at me. Just kept his eyes on the rows of cars. Could you describe him again? Vega asked. Kyle frowned. Thin. Older than my dad. Maybe late 40s back then. Gray jacket, jeans, glasses that caught the light. I remember because I thought he looked like a teacher. But he wasn't smiling. Not once. Ryan leaned forward. Do you remember if the Holloway's van was parked there? Kyle nodded slowly. Maroon minivan, right? Yeah, I remember the boy, the little one, climbing into the side door. That's when the man in gray turned away, like he'd been waiting for that moment. Then I lost track. My friends called me, and when I looked back, he was gone. Ryan's heart thudded. So he watched them get into their van. Kyle's eyes darkened. Yeah, and I didn't think anything of it, not until the news came. Back in the car, Ryan's voice shook. That's it, Vega. That's the bridge. The Holloways didn't vanish from the carousel. They made it to their van. And he followed. Vega gripped the steering wheel. Then how did the van end up 3 miles away at a construction site? Because he drove it there, Ryan said. Vega shot him a sharp look. With the family inside? Ryan stared out the window at the passing city lights. Or without. But either way, he had the keys. The FBI's old behavioral analysis file painted a profile. Organized offender, likely male, late 30s to 50s, experience in maintenance or custodial work, knowledge of the mall's infrastructure. Reading it now felt uncanny. It could have been written with Reed Barrow's name already filled in. Still, profiles weren't proof. Vega reminded Ryan of that constantly. Profiles point. They don't convict, but Ryan couldn't shake the imagery. The gray jacket, the glasses, the silence in the parking lot. The Holloways walking toward their van. Unaware eyes followed them. And then, gone. The following week, they visited the mall archives, a dusty storage basement where management kept decades of HR records and maintenance logs. Ryan flipped through boxes until his fingers caught on a folder labeled Barrow, Reed, Termination. Inside, a single-page report. Reason for departure. Voluntary resignation, effective April 1999. No notice given. But something else was stapled behind it. A maintenance log entry dated November 14th, 1998, the day of the Holloway disappearance. Barrow had checked out a master key set. The entry was initialed, but no record showed the keys being returned. Ryan felt a chill creep up his spine. Vega. He had the keys that day. Vega took the log from his hand, her face hardening. "Which means," she said slowly, "if he built that hidden room, he could lock it, seal it, come and go." Ryan whispered, like a jailer. That night, Ryan recorded in a hushed tone. For 16 years, the man in the gray jacket was just a rumor. But now, we have a name. Reed Barrow. He worked at the mall. He had the keys. He quit months after the Holloways vanished, and yet he was never interviewed. Not once. Why? Was he overlooked or protected? And if he still walks among us, does he carry the weight of what happened in that hidden room? Ryan paused, staring at the silent red light on his recorder. The silence seemed to whisper back. He watched them. He waited. The next morning, Vega dropped a file on the table between them. "Found him!" Ryan's pulse jumped. "Where?" "Bastrop, east of Austin, trailer park. He's 68 now." Ryan's chest tightened. The man in the parking lot was no longer a phantom. He was an address. For the first time, Ryan wondered if he really wanted the answers he'd been chasing. Every unsolved case leaves behind collateral damage. Reputations shredded, families broken, lives derailed. The Holloway disappearance was no exception. In the first 6 months of 1998 to 1999, investigators chased shadows, desperate for a break. And in their desperation, they created enemies out of the very people who had been searching for answers. The first target was Elaine's brother, David Barrett. David had been vocal from day one, demanding media attention, criticizing police for moving too slowly. At vigils, he shouted into microphones, his grief raw, his anger blistering. The public saw a grieving uncle. Detectives saw a man too eager for the spotlight. Within weeks, whispers spread. Had David been too close to his sister's family? Was he secretly in debt, maybe motivated by insurance? Reporters asked questions. Neighbors pulled away. Detective Vega flipped through the archived case notes in the APD file room. They ran him through polygraphs, searched his house, even checked his truck for fibers. Ryan scanned the reports, jaw tightening. And what did they find? Nothing. He passed. Clean. But the damage had been done. By spring of 1999, David had lost his job at a roofing company. Customers didn't want to hire a man police had whispered about. His marriage buckled. Eventually he moved north, leaving Austin altogether. Destroyed him, Vega muttered, and he was innocent. The second false lead cut even deeper. In December of 1998, investigators received a tip. A local man named Earl Hanley, in his 50s, was often seen lingering around Riverway Mall. Hanley was a drifter with a history of petty theft and a reputation for creepiness. He collected comic books, lived alone, and occasionally photographed shoppers with a cheap disposable camera. The tabloids pounced. Mall pervert linked to Holloway case. Hanley was dragged into interrogation, questioned for hours. He admitted to being at the mall that day, but denied seeing the Holloways. Forensics searched his small apartment. They found stacks of photos, mostly candid shots of women and kids at malls, parks, bus stops. To detectives, it looked damning. But none of the photographs showed the Holloways, and none connected him to the forgotten room. He was guilty of being strange, Ryan said as he read. Not of kidnapping a family. Still, Hanley's name was ruined. He moved to Louisiana in 2001, where he later died alone. He became the monster in the public's mind, Vega said quietly, and the real one slipped through. But the most devastating false lead was closer to home. Tom Holloway himself. In early 1999, rumors spread that Tom's dental practice had financial issues. Insurance paperwork delays, late payments, mounting bills. Reporters speculated. What if Tom staged the disappearance, escaped with his family to start fresh? The theory spiraled. Tabloids printed it. Talk radio mocked him. The dentist who drilled his way out of debt. Ryan's hands shook as he scrolled through old clippings. They painted him as some kind of fugitive. Like he abandoned them, Vega nodded grimly. Even after he was declared legally dead, people whispered. Elaine's family stopped reading the paper. They couldn't bear it. Ryan whispered, "Imagine being his daughter, wherever she was, hearing strangers say her dad ran away." Vega closed the folder. False leads don't just waste time. They rot the truth. By the summer of 1999, the investigation was tangled beyond recognition. Anonymous calls poured in. A sighting of the Holloways at a truck stop in Oklahoma. A waitress in New Mexico swore she served them pancakes. A bus driver in Arkansas claimed he saw Sarah with a man in gray. Each lead consumed manpower. Each led nowhere. And each time resources were diverted, Reed Barrow, the man in gray, the one with the keys, receded further into the shadows. Ryan interviewed one of the original detectives, now retired. His name was Calderon. He met Ryan at a diner off the highway, his hair silver, his eyes weary. "You want to know where we went wrong?" Calderon said, stirring his coffee. "Everywhere. We were drowning in tips. We had no system, no digital management. Half the reports sat in boxes for months." Ryan leaned in. "But what about Reed Barrow? A mall employee with the keys. Why wasn't he interviewed?" Calderon's jaw tightened. "Because we were told to focus on the family and the perverts. Management at the mall assured us every employee was cleared. We believed them." Ryan stared. "They lied." Calderon's voice dropped. "Or they wanted us off their backs." Riverway was hemorrhaging money. Bad press kills malls. A missing family inside the building? That's death, Ryan scribbled furiously. So the false leads weren't just accidents. They were convenient distractions. Calderon's eyes met his. "Kid, in this line of work, nothing's an accident." The ripple effect was brutal. By 2000, the case was cold. Margaret Barrett, Elaine's sister, stood outside Riverway Mall with a homemade sign that read, "Where are the Holloways?" Most shoppers walked past without looking. Some muttered that maybe Tom really had run off. Margaret told Ryan later, it felt like screaming into a hurricane. Nobody wanted to hear anymore. The police had moved on. Everyone had their own theory, and none of them were true. Ryan asked, "Did you ever suspect Reed Barrow?" Margaret shook her head. "I didn't even know his name until you dug it up. Nobody told us about him." Her voice cracked. "Instead, they told us my brother-in-law abandoned his children." That night, Ryan sat in his apartment, surrounded by stacks of paper. The false leads lay in piles. David's ruined life, Hanley's disgrace, Tom's vilification. 3 innocent men crushed under the weight of suspicion, and somewhere in the cracks left behind, the real perpetrator thrived. Ryan whispered into his recorder, "False leads are more than mistakes. They're smoke screens. And sometimes you have to ask, who benefits from the smoke? Who's watching, grinning, while the wrong men are destroyed?" The tape hissed for a moment. Then he added softly, "Was it Reed Barrow all along? In every police department, there are ghosts. Not just the unsolved cases that linger like a weight on the air, but the papers themselves. Memos misplaced, reports misfiled, notebooks slipped into the wrong box, whole fragments of truth that vanish into storage, where dust erases memory." For the Holloway case, one of those ghosts had a name, Detective Frank Keller. Keller had been on the original task force in 1998. Younger then, still sharp, still believing every case could be solved with enough persistence. He retired in 2010, arthritis claiming his knees, cynicism dimming his faith. He lived quietly in a ranch house outside Georgetown, his garage stacked with decades of old boxes. That was where Ryan found him. The day was overcast. rain whispering against the gutters. Keller answered the door in a flannel shirt, his face lined and weary. He eyed Ryan skeptically. "You're the podcast kid," Keller said, "digging into old bones." Ryan nodded. "I'm looking for anything that wasn't in the official files. People say you kept your own notes." Keller hesitated, then sighed. "Come on." The garage smelled of oil and paper. Keller led Ryan past stacks of banker's boxes, pulling one labeled Holloway, personal. Inside were yellowing legal pads, pocket notebooks, and manila folders. Keller flipped one open. "Back then, we didn't have digital indexing like today. I kept my own ledger. Names, sightings, patterns. Stuff I didn't trust to stay in the official files." Ryan leaned forward. "Why not?" Keller gave a humorless chuckle. "Because half the time, files disappeared. Mall management leaning on the department, higher-ups telling us to tread carefully. You learn quick to keep a shadow file." He handed Ryan a spiral notebook. The cover was cracked, the pages filled with cramped handwriting. In the corner of one page was a name Ryan had learned to dread: Reed Barrow. The entry read, November 14th, 1998. RB checked out master keys. Seen near East Concourse by janitor J. Bowers. Reported looking into family section of lot. Ryan's heart pounded. This isn't in the official case file." Keller shook his head. "Course not. When I tried to enter it, the lieutenant told me it was irrelevant. Said mall HR had cleared all employees." Ryan stared at the page. "So the one man who had the keys, his name was scrubbed?" "Buried," Keller said. "Like a lot of things." Another entry caught Ryan's eye. Anonymous tip. Woman claims to have heard banging noises behind East Concourse wall, early December 1998. Maintenance told her it was pipes. Ryan's stomach twisted. The forgotten room. He read aloud, voice trembling. "Banging noises. My God." Keller's eyes were grim. "I pushed for a structural check. Management refused. Said renovations would cost too much," Ryan whispered. "If we'd opened that wall 16 years ago." Keller cut him off. "Kid, don't torture yourself. We all live with what-ifs. That's the job." They went deeper. Keller's ledger was a labyrinth of fragments. Reports of a thin man in glasses eating alone in the food court daily for weeks before the disappearance. Notes that Barrow sometimes lingered near the carousel, even when off shift. A sketch from a teenage witness, crude but unmistakably resembling Barrow's gaunt face. Ryan flipped to the back. The final entries were scrawled, almost angry. 2001. Requested follow-up on RB. Denied. Told no budget for dead ends. 2005. Checked property records. No trace of RB in Texas DMV after 99. Like he vanished. Ryan looked up. But he didn't vanish. "He's in Bastrop now," Keller's mouth set into a hard line. "Then you found what we couldn't." Before Ryan left, Keller handed him one last item, a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. "Interview," Keller said. "Never logged officially. Mall janitor, night shift. Claimed he saw Barrow loading something into a service elevator the evening of November 14th. But the lieutenant said he was drunk, not credible." Ryan turned the cassette in his hands. "You kept this for 16 years." "Because it mattered," Keller said simply. That night, Ryan borrowed an old tape deck from a friend and played the recording in his apartment. The audio hissed, warped by time, but the voice came through. "I was sweeping by the freight corridor, around 8. Saw Barrow with a cart. Heavy load, covered by a tarp. He was sweating, looking around. Didn't want to be seen. He shoved it in the service elevator and went down," the interviewer's voice. Keller's asked, "Down where?" The janitor coughed. "Basement level, access tunnels, only maintenance had keys. When I asked, he told me to shut my mouth, it was trash." The tape clicked off. Ryan sat frozen. Barrow hadn't just had access. He'd been moving something, or someone. into the belly of the mall. When Ryan shared the tape with Vega the next day, she sat in silence for a long time. This ledger, these tapes, it's a second case file, the real one. And it all points back to Barrow. Ryan said, "So why was it buried?" Vega's eyes were cold. Because sometimes protecting a mall's reputation matters more than protecting a family. And sometimes the wrong people decide which truths see daylight. Keller's hidden ledger breathed life into a dead case. It sketched a portrait of a man in gray, methodical, patient, lurking. A man who used keys not just to open doors, but to close them behind his victims. Ryan recorded a new podcast segment late that night, voice trembling with both excitement and dread. For years, we chased phantoms. But the ledger changes that. It's not speculation. It's testimony. It's notes. It's the record of a man with keys, a cart, and secrets hidden behind drywall. Reed Barrow wasn't just a face in the parking lot. He was the architect of the Holloway's prison, and maybe their executioner. Ryan clicked stop, but sleep never came, because the last words of the janitor replayed in his mind. Basement level. Access tunnels. The forgotten room wasn't the only secret buried in Riverway Mall. The call came late, when Ryan was packing up his notes. Vega's voice on the other end was tight. "We've got someone. An old janitor. Used to work nights at Riverway. He reached out after Keller's name showed up in your podcast. Says he's been carrying something for years." Ryan's heart lurched. "And he's willing to talk?" "Not officially," Vega said. "He doesn't want cops, not at first. Only you. I'll come, but he asked for you by name." Ryan grabbed his recorder. "Where?" "South Austin. Nursing home." The place smelled of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. The TV in the common room played a game show no one was watching. A nurse led them down a quiet corridor to a private room. Inside sat a frail man in a wheelchair, skin paper thin, oxygen tubes at his nose. His name was Jeremiah Bowers. He looked up as Ryan entered, watery eyes sharp despite his age. "You're the one with the voice." The podcast. Ryan nodded. "Yes, sir." Jeremiah's hands trembled as he gestured them closer. "I've been waiting for years for someone to ask me again. They told me to shut up back then. But I saw. I heard they pulled chairs close." Vega stayed quiet, letting Ryan take the lead. Jeremiah's voice cracked, but steadied with determination. It was November. Cold night. I was sweeping near the East Concourse. Everyone was gone, just the humming of the lights. His eyes glazed as memory pulled him back. I heard crying, faint, like a child. It was coming from the wall. Thought I was losing my mind. I pressed my ear to the drywall, and I swear I heard a girl's voice whispering for help. Ryan's chest tightened. "Sarah." Jeremiah swallowed. "I reported it to my supervisor." He laughed, said it was pipes banging, said if I spread rumors, I'd lose my job. Next night I went back, quieter that time, but I still heard it. Then one night, silence. "Never again," Ryan whispered. "Why didn't you tell the police?" Jeremiah's gaze dropped to his frail hands. "I did. Told one detective. Keller, I think his name was. He believed me. But later, 2 men in suits came from mall management. Told me if I didn't shut my mouth, I'd be fired, blacklisted. I had 2 kids, a sick wife. What was I supposed to do?" Vega's jaw clenched. "So you stayed quiet." Jeremiah's eyes brimmed with tears. "And I've hated myself every day since. That little girl's voice. It still follows me when I try to sleep. 16 years. Her voice in my head." Ryan leaned forward, voice gentle. "Do you remember anyone else who might have been around? Anyone suspicious?" Jeremiah's breathing grew shallow. He closed his eyes. "Him. The thin one. Glasses, gray jacket. Always around the maintenance corridors. Reed Barrow. He carried himself like a man who owned the shadows, Ryan's throat went dry. "You knew his name?" Jeremiah nodded. Everybody knew him, quiet, never friendly, but always watching. Sometimes I caught him staring at families from the upper railing. Like he was studying them, Vega asked softly, "Did anyone else ever hear what you did?" Jeremiah's lips trembled. "Another janitor. Young kid." But after the suits came, he stopped talking. He quit soon after. Moved away. Don't know where silence pressed heavy in the room. Ryan could hear the faint hiss of Jeremiah's oxygen. Finally, Jeremiah whispered, "I thought if I stayed silent, I'd forget. But I never did. And now, I don't have much time left. I needed someone to know." Ryan clicked on his recorder. "Jeremiah, are you willing to let me capture this? Your story?" The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, let it out. Let the world hear her voice through me." Ryan's hand shook as he pressed record. The tape whirred, capturing every crack, every tremor in Jeremiah's words. When the testimony ended, Jeremiah slumped back, exhausted. "Do me one favor," he whispered. "If you find her, if you find where they put them, tell her I'm sorry." Ryan's throat ached. "I will." Back in the parking lot, Vega lit a cigarette, something Ryan had never seen her do. She inhaled sharply, exhaled smoke like fury. Heard a child's voice, 16 years ago, and they told him it was pipes. Ryan paced, his hands gripping his hair. He heard her alive, Vega. Alive, behind that wall. And they buried it. Vega's voice was low, dangerous. If that testimony is true, then mall management wasn't just negligent. They were complicit. Ryan stared at the dark sky. And Reed Barrow wasn't just a suspect. He was her jailer. Later that night, Ryan replayed Jeremiah's voice over and over. The frailty, the regret, her voice whispering for help. He wept quietly in his apartment. Not just for Sarah, but for the years stolen from her. For the silence that swallowed her voice while the world moved on. But beneath the grief was something else. Resolve. Jeremiah's testimony wasn't just a memory. It was a map. If a child's voice was heard behind that wall, then the mall still held more secrets. The forgotten room was not the end. It was only the beginning. The Riverway Mall was dying. Half its stores were shuttered. The carousel was dismantled, and the food court smelled more of dust than grease. But beneath the hollow shell, something still pulsed. The unanswered questions buried in its bones. Jeremiah Bauer's confession had changed everything. Now, with a search warrant in hand, Vega and a forensic excavation team arrived at the East Concourse before dawn. Ryan stood with them, camera gear hanging at his side, his pulse rattling in his chest. The mall was silent, like a mausoleum waiting to be cracked open. Work lights illuminated the corridor where Jeremiah swore he'd heard Sarah's voice. Engineers had mapped out the blueprints, service corridors, maintenance shafts, a sub-basement sealed for decades. Vega briefed the crew. "We focus here, behind this drywall, below the service elevator shaft. Anything we find gets bagged, logged, no exceptions." Ryan pressed his recorder closer. 16 years ago, they told a janitor the cries of a child were just pipes. Tonight, we'll find out if the walls can still talk. The first sledgehammer hit, echoing like thunder through the empty concourse. Dust billowed. Layers of drywall split apart. Behind them lay hollow space, not just a crawl area, but a chamber large enough to stand in. The flashlight beams caught discarded objects, old crates, rusted tools, the skeletal remains of furniture. Ryan's breath caught. This wasn't just maintenance. It was a hideaway. A forensic tech stepped carefully inside. Looks like it was modified. Walls reinforced with plywood. Someone made this livable. Vega's jaw tightened. A prison. They found scraps first. A child's shoe, crushed beneath debris. A comb missing half its teeth. Candy wrappers yellowed with age. Ryan crouched to photograph them, his hands trembling. She was here. They lived in here. Then came something worse. A small mattress, its springs bent, fabric stained dark. The techs bagged it silently, their expressions grim. No bones. Not yet. But the silence inside the chamber was heavier than death. Hours passed as they expanded the dig. Engineers drilled into the concrete near the service elevator shaft, where Jeremiah had seen Barrow with his cart. At 2:17 a.m., the drill broke through to a cavity below. The smell hit them first. Stale, earthy, metallic. The forensics lead swallowed hard. "We've got void space." Floodlights were lowered in. The beam revealed a narrow tunnel sloping downward, concrete crumbling at the edges. At the bottom lay something pale and unmistakable. A bone. Ryan's chest constricted as techs rappelled into the shaft. Minutes stretched like hours before one climbed back up, cradling evidence bags. Inside, skeletal fragments, small enough to belong to a child. Vega closed her eyes, then forced herself to look. "We'll need DNA confirmation, but it's likely..." Sarah Ryan's vision blurred. He stumbled back against the wall, recorder still running. "After 16 years, the Earth gives her back to us." Silent, but not forgotten. The excavation didn't stop there. By dawn, they had uncovered remnants of clothing. A pink sweater, frayed beyond recognition but with faint rainbow stitching. Ryan remembered the photograph Margaret had shown him of Sarah months before, grinning in that very sweater. Another bag contained the remnants of a man's belt buckle, corroded but still stamped with the initials T.H. Tom Holloway. The pieces told a story more brutal than words. The family herded here, held in hidden rooms, their lives stripped in silence. Vega stood with her hands on her hips as the first rays of sun crept through the cracked skylights above. She looked years older. "We can't say yet if we've recovered all three," she said, her voice low. "But this proves one thing. The Holloways never left this mall." Ryan whispered, and Barrow made sure of that. By afternoon, news vans swarmed the parking lot. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras pressed forward. Ryan stood on the edge, microphone in hand, recording for his own audience. For years, Riverway Mall was a symbol of shopping and family weekends. Today, it is a tomb. The Holloways weren't taken miles away, as we believed. They were entombed here, hidden behind drywall and beneath concrete, by someone who knew every secret of this building. His voice cracked. The mall was their grave. That evening, Ryan sat alone, replaying Jeremiah's words, her voice whispering for help. He thought of Sarah in that chamber, crying through the walls. He thought of Tom's belt buckle, left like a whisper from the grave. He thought of Elaine, whose remains were not yet found. And he thought of Reed Barrow, the man in gray, who had walked away from all of it, unnoticed, unpunished. Now, for the first time, Ryan felt not just obsession but rage. Barrow had built these tombs, and Barrow was still alive. The trailer sat at the edge of Bastrop's pine woods, hunched like a secret. Rust streaked its aluminum siding. A tarp sagged over the roof, patched with duct tape. The yard was littered with broken tools and empty feed sacks. Reed Barrow lived here, the man whose name had haunted every page of Keller's ledger, every whisper in Jeremiah's testimony. Vega parked her cruiser on the dirt drive. Ryan sat beside her, stomach churning, recorder already running in his pocket. "This is it," Vega murmured. She killed the engine, eyes fixed on the door. "No dramatics. We talk, we watch. We don't tip our hand until we've got him." Ryan nodded, though his pulse hammered in his ears. The door opened before they even knocked. Barrow stood framed in the doorway, thinner than Ryan expected, yet solid somehow, like tension coiled beneath skin. His hair was gray at the temples, glasses reflecting the late sun. His eyes, though, were alert, too alert. "Detective Vega," Barrow said calmly, as if greeting an expected guest. And the reporter. "I've heard your voice on that podcast." Ryan froze. His voice. Barrow had been listening. Vega kept her tone even. "Mr. Barrow, we'd like to ask you a few questions about Riverway Mall." About the Holloways. Barrow's gaze flicked to Ryan, then back to Vega. "That was a long time ago." 16 years, Vega said. "You worked maintenance. You had master keys." Barrow stepped aside. "If you've come all this way, I suppose you'd like to sit." Ryan hesitated, but Vega entered first. The trailer smelled of dust and motor oil. Books lined one wall. Not novels, but manuals, diagrams, architectural blueprints. A folding table held stacks of notes and sketches. Ryan's skin prickled. Blueprints of malls. Barrow gestured to the chairs. "So you found something. Otherwise you wouldn't be here." Vega sat, her badge glinting. "We've found remains beneath Riverway. Evidence of a concealed chamber. Do you know anything about that?" Barrow folded his hands. His voice was calm, almost bored. "I know Riverway was built sloppy. Plenty of forgotten spaces, sub-basements no one cared about. But remains?" His lips curved faintly. "That sounds like poor housekeeping." Ryan leaned forward before he could stop himself. "A child's shoe, a pink sweater, Tom Holloway's belt buckle. Don't play dumb. You put them there." Barrow's eyes settled on him, unblinking. "You've got passion. Dangerous thing in journalism, makes you see what you want to see." Silence stretched. Outside, a crow called from the trees. Vega broke it. "Where were you? November 14th, 1998. Barrow tilted his head. "Working, like always." "Ask the schedules." "We did," Vega said. "You checked out master keys that night. Witnesses saw you with a cart near the service elevator. You never logged what you were moving." Barrow's smile didn't reach his eyes. 16 years and you still cling to janitor's gossip." Ryan's voice shook. "Jeremiah heard Sarah through the walls." He heard her begging. "You locked them in. You listened to a child die for the first time." Something flickered in Barrow's expression. Not guilt, not fear. Amusement. "You think children don't cry in malls?" he asked softly. "That building was full of voices. You choose which ones to believe." Vega leaned in, voice sharp. "You had a cart, Barrow. What was under the tarp?" Barrow adjusted his glasses, his calm returning. "Trash. Always trash. You people dig in garbage long enough, you start calling it treasure." Ryan's fists clenched. He wanted to scream, but Vega's hand brushed his knee under the table. A warning. "Not yet." Barrow rose, pacing slowly. "You know what I think? You're desperate. You dig holes in a dead mall, find scraps of old lives, and you invent stories. Because stories sell." He turned to Ryan, voice lowering. "And you, boy, you'll turn me into a monster for your podcast. Makes you famous, doesn't it? All those listeners, hungry for shadows." Ryan met his gaze, refusing to look away. "I don't need to make you a monster, Barrow." "You already are." Barrow studied him for a long moment, then chuckled. "Careful. Monsters bite." The interview bled into silence. Finally, Vega stood. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Barrow. Don't leave town." Barrow's smile sharpened. "I don't travel much these days." As they stepped outside, Ryan's lungs filled with pine-scented air like he'd been drowning inside. Vega locked eyes with him. "He knows," she said. "He knows we're close." Ryan whispered, "And he's enjoying it." That night, Ryan replayed the recording. Barrow's voice was calm, controlled, yet threaded with something darker, satisfaction. He wasn't defensive. He was performing. Ryan scribbled notes, blueprints in trailer, obsession with architecture, speaks in riddles, thrives on being hunted. He said aloud into his recorder, "Reed Barrow isn't afraid of being caught. He's afraid of being forgotten." To him, the mall wasn't just a crime scene. It was his canvas. Ryan shut the recorder off, heart pounding. And for the first time, he feared that Barrow wasn't finished painting. 2 weeks after the excavation, the Holloway remains lay in the county lab. Sarah and Tom were confirmed through DNA, but Elaine was still missing. Ryan couldn't shake it. The family wasn't whole without her, and Barrow knew it. Detective Vega found the first crack. She burst into Ryan's apartment one rainy evening, a file folder under her arm. "Property records," she said, slapping them down on the table. "Guess who signed off on several maintenance contracts for Riverway in the late 90s? Ryan leaned forward. The signature was careful, tight. Reed Barrow. But beneath it, another name caught his eye. Elaine Holloway. His blood froze. "What?" Vega nodded grimly. Before she vanished, Elaine worked part-time for mall administration. She handled bookkeeping. "That's why her name's here," Ryan whispered. "So Barrow knew her before the disappearance." "Not just knew her," Vega said. "He had access to her paperwork. To her schedule. He'd been circling them for months." That night, Ryan returned to Barrow's trailer, alone. Vega would kill him if she knew, but he couldn't wait. He needed answers before Barrow slipped further into the shadows. Barrow opened the door without surprise. The reporter returns. "Can't stay away, can you?" Ryan stepped inside, recorder running. "Where is Elaine?" Barrow's glasses glinted. "Always straight to the heart. Admirable Sarah. Tom, we found them. But Elaine's not there." You know why Barrow tilted his head, considering. Then he moved to the table, picking up one of his yellowed blueprints. It wasn't Riverway this time. It was a different building, a church, half collapsed. "You know," Barrow said softly, "I've always believed in balance. Every structure has weak points. Stress them right, and the whole thing falls. But sometimes the beauty isn't in collapse. It's in keeping something hidden inside, forever." Ryan's throat tightened. "Where is she, Barrow?" Barrow looked at him, eyes glimmering with something between pride and cruelty. Elaine was different. The husband, stubborn. The child, fragile. But Elaine. He paused, savoring the word. Elaine understood spaces. She worked with the mall's books, but she asked questions. She saw me too clearly. Ryan's stomach turned. "You killed her." Barrow's smile didn't falter. "I preserved her." Ryan's voice broke. "Where?" Barrow leaned closer, whispering as though sharing a secret blueprint. "Not beneath." Above, the revelation came the next morning. Vega and a crew scoured the mall's abandoned offices, long sealed. In the rafters above the atrium, behind insulation and ductwork, they found a narrow crawl space. Inside lay the skeletal remains of a woman, hidden in a cavity between beams. She had been placed there deliberately, her body arranged as though sleeping. DNA confirmed what they already knew. Elaine Holloway. The news shook the city. For 16 years, people had walked beneath that ceiling, shopped for shoes, eaten pretzels, unaware that Elaine lay silently above them. Ryan recorded in hushed tones at the site. She wasn't buried underground. She was suspended above, watching, unseen. Barrow split the family. Father and daughter entombed below, mother hidden above. A symmetry only he could admire. A design not of architecture but of cruelty. Barrow was arrested days later, charged with 3 counts of murder, unlawful concealment, and a list of other offenses. He said nothing in court, only smiled faintly as the charges were read. Ryan watched from the gallery, his recorder in his lap. For a moment, Barrow's eyes flicked toward him. The look was not hatred, not fear. It was acknowledgement. The Holloways were finally laid to rest together in a quiet cemetery outside Austin. Mourners gathered, some who had been children when the family vanished, now grown. Sarah's pink sweater, faded but intact, was placed atop her coffin. Tom's belt buckle lay with him. Elaine's remains were given a silk shawl her sister remembered her wearing. Ryan stood at the edge, tears in his eyes, microphone lowered. This moment wasn't for broadcasting. It was for silence. That night, back at his desk, he recorded the final episode. True crime stories often end with courtrooms and verdicts. But this story ends in spaces, in a mall that became a tomb, in walls that held the cries of a child, in ceilings that concealed a mother. Reed Barrow designed not just crimes, but architecture of silence. He counted on time to erase voices, on drywall and concrete to bury memory. But memory, like cracks in concrete, always finds a way through. The Holloways are no longer missing. They are home. And Barrow, the man who believed he could hide them forever, will now be remembered not as a ghost in the mall's corridors, but as the architect of his own downfall. Ryan clicked stop. The tape whirred to silence. For the first time in months, he let himself sleep. Winter settled over Austin with brittle mornings and pale skies. Riverway Mall, once a hive of life, stood fenced off, its entrances chained, demolition equipment parked nearby. Soon, the building would be rubble. Ryan drove out one last time before the walls fell. He stood at the edge of the cracked parking lot, microphone in hand, recording his closing thoughts. The mall is empty now, its glass eyes boarded, its heart hollow. But the echoes remain, laughter, footsteps, whispers, and beneath it all, the voices we almost forgot. The Holloways, whose absence haunted these walls longer than their presence ever did. Wind rattled the chain-link fence. Somewhere inside, metal groaned as if the building itself remembered. Detective Vega joined him, hands stuffed into her coat. She had lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when they first met. "You think knocking this place down helps?" Ryan asked. Vega looked at the hulking silhouette of the mall. "Helps the city, maybe. Not them. Not really." Ryan nodded. "But it keeps Barrow's shrine from standing." Her jaw tightened. "Barrow doesn't get a shrine. He gets a cell." They visited the cemetery together later that week. Fresh snow clung to the grass. 3 new headstones stood side by side. Thomas Holloway, Elaine Holloway, Sarah Holloway. Flowers lay across them, left by strangers who only knew the family through headlines and podcasts. Ryan crouched, brushing snow from Sarah's stone. "People will remember you now," he whispered, "not as a mystery, but as yourselves." Back in his apartment, Ryan edited the final episode. He layered the sounds. Jeremiah's trembling testimony, the clang of excavation, Vega's steady voice, and finally his own narration. He ended with words he hadn't scripted, words that came raw, unfiltered. "We tell these stories because silence protects no one. Silence is where predators live. To speak, to remember, is to keep the walls from closing in. The Holloways are gone, but their story is no longer buried. It breathes in every voice that refuses to forget." He uploaded the episode at midnight. By dawn, thousands had listened. Messages flooded in, grief, anger, gratitude. Strangers lit candles, posted photos, shared memories of the mall from their childhoods. The story spread beyond Austin, beyond Texas. The Holloways were no longer invisible. Barrow sat in his cell miles away, awaiting trial. He had no podcast, no platform, only 4 walls and silence. Ryan imagined him listening somehow, his smile faint, savoring that he had become part of the narrative. But Ryan had taken control. Barrow wasn't the architect anymore. The Holloways were, their voices, their absence, their echoes. One evening, weeks later, Ryan dreamed of the mall. He walked its concourses, lights flickering, shops closed, but instead of emptiness, he heard laughter. Sarah's, bright and young. Elaine humming, Tom calling her name. He followed the sounds, past the boarded carousel, into the atrium. There, instead of shadows, sunlight poured down. When he woke, his chest ached. But the ache wasn't only sorrow. It was something else. Relief. The mall would fall, Barrow would stand trial, time would go on. But the Holloway story would remain, not entombed in silence, but alive in memory, in tape, in every echo that refused to fade. And for Ryan, for Vega, for the city, the truth, though late, though brutal, had finally broken through the walls.